the crimson sands of the Galaxy Coliseum drank deep from another fallen warrior's veins. Thorson Hayes stood over his latest opponent, a six-armed beast from the Kepler system, whose chitinous armor had proven no match for human cunning and desperation. The crowd's roar thundered through the vast arena like a cosmic storm, but Thorson heard none of it. His thoughts were consumed by a single image, Tyra's violet eyes wide with terror as Droskar's guards had dragged her away. 3 months had passed since his capture. 3 months since he'd watched helplessly as his alien companion was stolen from him. 3 months of blood sweat and survival in this godforsaken arena, where 1,000 species gathered to watch lesser beings tear each other apart for the amusement of their betters. Thorson spat blood into the sand and raised his twin blades toward the viewing box where Droskar sat. The warlord's grotesque features twisted into what might have been a smile on his scaled face. Beside him, barely visible through the energy shields, sat Tyra. Even from this distance, Thorson could see the chains that bound her, the collar around her throat, that marked her as property. Another victory for the human. The announcer's voice boomed across multiple languages, translated instantly by neural implants. 47 kills and counting. Will nothing stop this savage from Earth? Nothing would. Thorson had made that promise to himself the day they'd had thrown him into this pit. He would carve a bloody path through every warrior, every monster, every champion they put before him until he reached Tyra. The trail of bodies behind him was testament to that vow. The first weeks had been the hardest. Thorson was strong, enhanced by military augmentations from his service in the Human Colonial Defense Force, but he was just one man against creatures that evolution had designed for killing. The arena masters had expected him to die quickly, another novelty act, to amuse the masses before the real entertainment began. They had been wrong. His first opponent had been a Thraxian berserker, a creature of pure muscle and rage that stood 3 meters tall and wielded bone clubs grown from its own skeleton. Thorson had watched it tear apart 2 other gladiators before his turn came. As the gate opened and the beast charge time seemed to slow, his military training kicked in. While the Thraxian relied on brute force, Thorson used speed and intelligence. He dodged the crushing blows, targeted weak points, and when the creature finally fell, the arena had gone silent. Then came the Xenarch assassin, with its camouflage skin and poisoned claws. Thorson had felt the burn of toxins in his veins, but fought through the pain using the creature's own stealth against it. He learned to fight blind, relying on other senses, waiting for the telltale shimmer that betrayed the alien's position. The kills mounted. A crystal-spined hunter from the Andromeda sector, twin serpentine warriors who fought in perfect synchronization until Thorson severed that link with a precisely thrown blade. A cybernetically enhanced gladiator whose own augmentations became his weakness when Thorson overloaded them with an electromagnetic pulse device scavenged from the arena. Each victory earned him better weapons, better armor, and closer seats to the royal box. But more importantly, each victory brought him one step closer to Tyra. Between fights in the gladiator quarters deep beneath the arena, Thorson had learned the truth of his situation. The other warriors, those who survived long enough to speak, told him about Droskar, about his growing empire, about the political marriages and conquests that had made him one of the most feared warlords in the sector. They spoke in hushed tones about Tyra, the last heir to the crystal throne of Zephyria, a kingdom that had resisted Droskar's expansion for generations. "She's the key to everything," Xanthos had explained during one of their rare conversations. The Corvani warrior had survived nearly as long as Thorson, his 4 arms and chitinous armor making him a formidable fighter. With her bloodline, Droskar can claim legitimate rule over Zephyria. The Council of Worlds might even recognize his authority. And if she refuses, Xanthos' mandibles clicked in what passed for bitter laughter among his kind. What choice does she have? Refuse, and he'll make her watch every human in the sector die slowly. Accept, and she might save her people. That night, Thorson had stared at the ceiling of his cell and planned. Escape attempts were suicide. The arena's security systems were designed by the best minds in the galaxy, and the collars they wore would detonate if they strayed too far from authorized areas. But there was another way, the ancient right of champion. It had taken weeks more to earn an audience with Droskar himself. 47 victories, 47 kills. The arena master had finally been forced to acknowledge that this human was more than just an entertaining sideshow. When Thorson had knelt in the sand and formally challenged Droskar to single combat for the freedom of his captive, the crowd had gone wild. Droskar had laughed a sound like grinding metal. "A primitive human dares challenge me. You forget your place meet." But the laws were clear, written in the blood of 1,000 civilizations. A gladiator who reached 50 victories could invoke the right of champion. Droskar couldn't refuse without losing face before the other arena lords, but he could set the terms. "Very well," he had said, his voice carrying across the arena. "But understand this, little human. When I kill you, I will make your alien whore watch. Then I will give her to my soldiers as a wedding gift." The rage that had consumed Thorson in that moment had been beyond language, beyond thought. Only the arena's behavioral dampeners had kept him from trying to leap the barriers and rip Droskar's throat out with his bare hands. Now, 3 days later, the moment had come. The arena had been transformed for the occasion. The sand had been fresh raked and blessed by priests from a dozen different faiths. Weapons racks lined the edges, filled with implements of death from across the galaxy. This wouldn't be just a fight, it would be a war. Droskar entered from the opposite gate, and Thorson saw his enemy clearly for the first time. The warlord was massive, easily 3 meters tall, with the kind of bulk that spoke of genetic enhancements and combat drugs. His scales were black as space itself, and biomechanical implants covered half his face. In his hands, he carried a weapon that was part sword, part energy cannon, a fusion of technology that spoke of countless conquered worlds. "Today we settle this." Droskar's voice boomed across the arena. "The human dies, the air becomes my bride, and Zephyria bows before its new emperor." Thorson said nothing. Words were meaningless now. Everything that mattered was in the fighting. The signal to begin was a pulse of energy that every being in the arena felt in their bones. Droskar moved faster than something his size should have been able to, crossing the distance between them in seconds. His weapon screamed as it cut through the air, and only Thorson's enhanced reflexes saved him from being cut in half. The force of the blow sent him rolling across the sand, and immediately he understood why Droskar had ruled for so long. This wasn't just brute strength. The warlord was a skilled warrior who had survived countless battles. His weapon work was precise, economical, deadly. Thorson came up with both his blades ready, deflecting the next strike in a shower of sparks. The energy component of Droskar's weapon discharged, and Thorson felt the heat wash over him as he twisted aside. In return, he struck out with his offhand blade, scoring a shallow cut across Droskar's thigh. "First blood to the human," the announcer cried, but Droskar didn't even seem to notice the wound. They circled each other weapons, weaving deadly patterns in the air. Thorson had learned to read his opponents during his time in the arena to see the tells that preceded each attack. But Droskar was different. His movements were controlled, calculated. Every strike was designed not just to kill, but to demoralize. "She cries for you at night," Droskar taunted as their weapons locked. "Your little princess. She begs me to spare you, promises me anything if I'll just let you live." He leaned in close, his breath reeking of sulfur and decay. "I tell her yes, of course. After all, someone needs to warm her bed after I'm done with her." Rage was a weapon, but it was also a weakness. Thorson had learned that lesson the hard way during his military service. Let anger control you, and you made mistakes. But he also knew how to channel that fury to use it as fuel without letting it consume his judgment. He broke the lock and spun his blade, carving a line of fire across Droskar's chest. The warlord roared more in surprise than pain, and brought his weapon around in a wild swing. Thorson ducked under it and came up inside Droskar's guard, both blades seeking vital points. But Droskar's scale armor wasn't just for show. Thorson's strikes sparked harmlessly off the hardened plates, and a backhand blow from Droskar's free hand sent him skidding across the sand. He tasted blood his own this time. "You're strong for a human," Droskar admitted, advancing slowly. "But strength isn't enough. You think you're fighting for love, for honor. Such primitive concepts. I fight for power, for empire. My victory is inevitable, because I want it more than you want her." "You're wrong." Thorson wiped blood from his mouth and stood. "You want power. I need her. There's a difference." This time, Thorson didn't wait for Droskar to attack. He launched himself forward, both blades spinning in a complex pattern that he'd learned from watching the Corvani masters. Droskar parried, desperately forced back by the sheer aggression of the assault. For a moment, it seemed like Thorson might break through. His left blade found a gap in the armor, sliding between scales to draw a line of green-black blood. Droskar stumbled, his guard dropping, and Thorson pressed his advantage. Then the trap was sprung. Droskar's stumble had been a feint, and as Thorson committed to his attack, the warlord's weapon reconfigured itself. The blade retracted, and what had been a sword became a fully functional energy cannon. At point-blank range, there was no time to dodge. The energy blast caught Thorson in the chest, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing into the arena wall. His armor was scorched black, and every breath felt like breathing fire. Around them, the crowd erupted in bloodthirsty cheers. "Did you really think you could challenge me? With simple steel?" Droskar stalked forward, his weapon shifting back to sword configuration. "I have conquered 100 worlds, defeated 1,000 champions. You're nothing but an entertaining diversion." Thorson struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. His right arm was numb, and one of his blades lay broken in the sand, but he was still alive, still fighting. He thought of Tyra, of the promise he'd made to himself 3 months ago. As Droskar raised his weapon for the killing blow, Thorson moved. Not forward, not back, but sideways, rolling along the arena wall toward the weapons racks. Droskar's strike gouged stone where Thorson's head had been a heartbeat before. The weapons rack contained implements from a dozen different worlds designed for a variety of physiologies and fighting styles. Thorson's hand closed around something familiar, a plasma grenade from a Terran military arsenal. How it had ended up here he didn't know, and didn't care. What mattered was that he recognized the activation sequence. Droskar turned to follow, but he was already too late. Thorson primed the grenade and hurled it not at the warlord, but at the arena floor between them. The explosion sent sand and debris flying, creating a momentary screen of chaos. When the dust cleared, Thorson was gone. For a moment, confusion reigned. The crowd murmured uncertainly, craning their necks to spot the human gladiator. Droskar spun in place, his weapon ready, his enhanced senses scanning for any sign of his opponent. He found him too late. Thorson dropped from above, having used the explosion's cover to reach one of the arena's suspension cables. His remaining blade, channeled with every ounce of his strength and desperation, punched through Droskar's shoulder armor and sank deep into the flesh beneath. They crashed to the sand together, rolling and grappling in a savage, desperate struggle. Droskar was stronger, but he was also wounded and off balance. Thorson held on with grim determination, twisting the blade deeper, feeling the warlord's blood pour hot over his hands. With a roar of fury, Droskar managed to break free, sending Thorson rolling across the sand. Both warriors came to their feet at the same time, circling each other like wounded beasts. Droskar's left arm hung useless at his side, green blood steadily dripping from the wound. Thorson's armor was in tatters, and every movement sent fresh pain through his battered body. "Impressive." Droskar admitted, his breathing labored. "Perhaps I underestimated you, but this changes nothing. In the end, you will die, and she will be mine." "Maybe," Thorson said, shifting his grip on his remaining blade, "but you'll never live to enjoy it." They came together one final time, in a hurricane of steel and fury. Blade met blade in a symphony of sparks, both warriors pushing themselves beyond their limits. Thorson fought with the desperate strength of a man with nothing left to lose, while Droskar fought with the cold calculation of someone who had never known defeat. In the end, it came down to a single moment, a single choice. Droskar's weapon swept in a killing arc aimed at Thorson's neck. The human warrior had two options: dodge backward and give ground, or commit everything to a single, desperate counterattack. Against any other opponent, the safe choice would have been obvious. But safe wouldn't save Tyra. Thorson stepped forward into the strike, accepting Droskar's blade across his ribs, in exchange for getting inside the warlord's guard. His own blade, guided by desperation and love, and 3 months of accumulated rage, found the one gap in Droskar's armor that mattered: the joint where the neck met the shoulder, where even the best armor had to bend. Steel met flesh, and Droskar's eyes went wide with something that might have been surprise. He tried to speak, tried to raise his weapon for one last strike, but the strength was flowing out of him along with his life's blood. They stood frozen like that for a heartbeat, locked in their final embrace. Then Droskar toppled backward, his weapon clattering to the sand, his eyes staring sightlessly at the artificial suns above. The arena fell silent. Thorson stood over his fallen enemy, swaying on his feet, barely able to stay upright. Blood, his own and Droskar's, painted him from head to toe. But he was alive. Against all odds, all probability, he was alive. And Tyra was free. The silence broke all at once as the crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, boos, and shocked exclamations. Some had bet on the human, but most had expected to watch another entertaining execution. Instead, they had witnessed a deed of the impossible, a mere human defeating one of the sector's most feared warlords in single combat. The arena masters were already in motion, their security forces moving to secure the now masterless prize in the royal box. But the laws were clear. By right of combat, by blood and blade and victory, Tyra belonged to her champion now. Thorson looked up at the royal box and saw her there, no longer chained, the collar torn from her throat. Even from this distance, he could see the tears streaming down her face, the wonder and relief, and something else. Something that made the pain in his battered body fade to insignificance. She loved him. After everything they'd been through, everything he'd done to reach her, she loved him. The arena medics reached him, then their scanners beeping warnings about internal injuries and blood loss. Thorson let them tend to him, but his eyes never left Tyra as she made her way down from the royal box, flanked by guards who no longer held her captive, but protected her passage through the crowd. When she finally reached the arena floor, when she finally stood before him again, Thorson fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in relief so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. Tyra. Her name was barely a whisper on his lips. She knelt beside him, her hands gentle on his face, mindful of his wounds. "I knew you would come for me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never doubted, not once." "I made a promise," he said, leaning into her touch. 47 kills. I counted every one." "I know, I watched them all." Her violet eyes glittered with unshed tears. "But it's over now. Droskar is dead, and his claim to Zephyria dies with him." "Not quite," a new voice interrupted. They looked up to see Grek Droskar's former lieutenant standing at the edge of the arena with a squad of armed soldiers. The scarred alien's expression was unreadable as he surveyed the scene, his dead master. The victorious human, the princess they'd fought so hard to claim. Lord Droskar made many enemies in his rise to power. Grek continued, his weapon lowered but ready. His empire was built on fear and force. With him gone, that empire crumbles. Already his other lieutenants fight among themselves for the scraps. Thorson struggled to his feet, pushing aside the medics' protests. His body screamed in pain, but he forced himself to stand between Tyra and this new threat. "What do you want?" he demanded. Grek's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. "Peace, surprisingly. Lady Tyra, your people have suffered long under my master's rule. Perhaps it's time for a new arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Tyra stepped forward, and Thorson saw the princess transform into the ruler she was born to be. Even in the arena covered in dirt and blood, she carried herself with natural authority. A treaty? Droskar's personal forces will withdraw from Zephyrian space. In return, your kingdom grants safe passage and trading rights to those of us who wish to make a new start. Grek gestured toward the dead warlord. Some of us served him out of fear, not loyalty. His death frees us to choose differently. It wasn't the ending Thorson had expected, but perhaps it was the one they needed. Not every problem could be solved with a blade. The negotiations that followed were conducted in the Arena Master's private chambers, with representatives from a dozen different factions present. Thorson, still bearing the wounds of his victory, stayed close to Tyra's side throughout the proceedings. He understood little of the political complexities involved, but he watched for threats ready to shed more blood if necessary. Fortunately, it wasn't needed. The treaty was signed before the arena's artificial sun set, witnessed by the assembled crowd of dignitaries, gladiators, and merchants who had gathered for the spectacle. But even as peace was made, Thorson knew this was only the beginning. Droskar's death had created a power vacuum, and nature, whether planetary or galactic, abhorred such things. Other warlords would rise, other threats would emerge. And somewhere out there, humans still languished in slavery, still fought in arenas like this one. "What are you thinking about?" Tyra asked, as they stood on the balcony of their guest quarters, looking out over the arena complex that had been their prison for so long. "The future," Thorson admitted. "Your kingdom, my people. What comes next?" She moved closer, slipping her hand into his. "I've been thinking about that too. Zephyria needs allies, and humanity needs a voice among the great powers. Perhaps we can help each other. A queen and a gladiator." He raised an eyebrow. "The politicians would love that." "Let them talk," she said firmly. "I've seen what you're willing to sacrifice for the people you care about. That's exactly the kind of strength my kingdom needs." As the twin moons rose over the arena, world casting silver light across the sands that had drunk so much blood, Thorson and Tyra began to plan. Not just for their own future, but for a new alliance between their peoples. An alliance forged not in conquest or political necessity, but in blood sacrifice and love. The trail of bodies Thorson had left behind him told a story of determination and devotion that would echo across the galaxy. But perhaps more importantly, it had opened a path toward something better. A future where humanity might stand as equals among the stars, where love could triumph over power, and where a gladiator's loyalty could reshape the balance of worlds. The arena would go on, of course. There would always be those who sought power through violence, who found entertainment in the suffering of others. But for one human warrior and one alien princess, the fighting was finally over. Their real work was just beginning. Xanthos found them there hours later, his Katina's armor replaced by the formal robes of an ambassador. "The first ships are already preparing to leave," he reported. "Word of Droskar's death is spreading fast. Half his empire will be in open revolt by morning." "And the other half?" Tyra asked. "Will probably try to claim his inheritance. There's already fighting between his generals." Xanthos paused, his compound eyes focusing on Thorson. "You know they'll come for you eventually. Droskar's death makes you famous or infamous, depending on who's asking. Every young warrior looking to make a name will want to kill the human who slayed the scourge of Kepler." Thorson nodded grimly. He'd known this was coming from the moment Droskar fell. Fame was as much a curse as a blessing in the galactic arena system. "Let them come," he said simply. "I've got something worth fighting for now." "We both do." Tyra corrected her grip on his hand, tightening. "Tomorrow we begin the journey home, to Zephyria, where our real work starts." As they prepared to leave the arena world behind, Thorson took one last look at the sands where he'd spilled so much blood. 47 lives had ended at his hands in the pursuit of this moment. Each death had been necessary, but that didn't make them easy to carry. He thought of the Thraxian berserker who had fought with honor even in death. The Xenarch assassin, whose final strike had nearly ended everything. The crystal-spined hunter, who had whispered a blessing in his native tongue as his life faded. They had all been someone's child, someone's hope, someone's love. But they had also been the price of freedom, his and Tyra's both. In a perfect universe, there might have been another way. In the universe they actually lived in, sometimes the only path to love led through a field of graves. "No regrets?" Tyra asked, seeing something in his expression. 47, he said quietly, "but none for coming after you." She understood. She always understood. As their ship lifted off from the arena, world surface carrying them towards Etheria, and whatever challenges awaited them there, Thorson allowed himself a moment to imagine a different future. Not for himself, he had made his choices and would live with the consequences, but for the generations that would come after. Perhaps one day, love wouldn't require such sacrifice. Perhaps one day freedom wouldn't demand such a bloody price. Perhaps one day the arenas would stand empty, their sands clean of blood, their crowds dispersed to find entertainment that didn't require death as the price of admission. It was a nice thought, but until that day came, there would be others like him, warriors and lovers and heroes, who would pay whatever price was asked to protect those they cared about. The galaxy was vast and dark and often cruel, but it was also full of beings willing to light candles against that darkness, no matter the cost. Thorson Hayes had lit his candle in the arena's bloody sand. Now it was time to see how bright it could burn. The stars wheeled overhead as their ship entered hyperspace, carrying them toward home, toward hope, toward a future written not in blood, but in love. Behind them, the arena world spun on in its orbit, already preparing for the next day's games, the next round of violence, the next desperate souls fighting for their freedom. But for Thorson and Tyra, the fighting was done. They had found their way through the darkness to each other, and together they would build something worthy of all those who had fallen along the way. The trail of bodies would always be there, a reminder of the price paid and the love that had justified it. But the future, their future, belonged to the living, and they intended to make it count.